be here this morning. The title for this panel asks 3 questions, and I just thought I'd try to answer those questions in order. First, though, I'd like to recognize Professor Codevilla, who has been a practitioner and a thinker on matters of warfare and diplomacy for many years and influenced my own thought. I can remember a time in Iraq at a small combat outpost in 2006 where I was a platoon leader. We didn't have running water, we didn't have regular electricity, we didn't have hot food, but what we did have was the Claremont Review of Books. And Professor Codevilla had written in that book, or in that magazine, as he often did, and I remember reading his work there, as I did in Afghanistan years later as well. So it's a great pleasure to be here with him. I found myself in both of those, in both battlefronts, Iraq and Afghanistan, because of what happened on September 11th. I was in law school that day. I was in my last year of law school when America was attacked. And I knew from that point that I wanted to go fight on the front lines. I finished school and repaid my loans, but then I left and I became an infantry officer to go fight. And I think that answers the first question. Are we fighting too many wars? And I would say no. We're fighting one war, and it's a war against radical Islamic jihad. It's not a war against terror alone. Terror is a technique or tactic, as the professor said. It's a war against specific people, radical Islamic jihadists who are trying to use terror to defeat the United States. Iraq and Afghanistan, as much as we might see those as distinct, are just 2 battlefronts in that war. I happen to fight in both of them. There are many other places, though, where that war is being waged by smaller teams, sometimes as small as a 12-man Green Beret A-team, places like Yemen and Somalia, Libya, Mali. That war comes to our own shores, not just as it did on 9/11, but when individuals try to attack it, like the Fort Hood shooter, Major Nidal Hassan, or the underwear bomber, Umar Abdul Muttalib, or the Times Square bomber, Fazil Shahzad. This is a war that we have to engage in and a war that we have to win. I would say, since we're the heirs of Reagan, that I would paraphrase our aims here, as he said of the Cold War: we win and they lose. What does victory look like in this war? Well, it won't look like it did after World War II. There won't be ticker tape parades, but our enemies will be broken. Their ability to project power against American interests or Americans, whether they be in Manhattan or the Pentagon, or our consulates and embassies overseas, will be degraded, and their co-religionists will reject their radical theological aims. And it is a war, though, that has to be won, or it is a war that will be lost. Our president often says 10 years of war are ending. Wars are not movies. They do not end. They are won or they are lost. The quickest way, as Orwell said, to lose a war or to end a war is to lose it. And I don't intend to let that happen to America on my watch as long as I'm in Washington, D.C. The next question is, should we fight anywhere? I think the answer, based on my remarks, is obviously yes, we should fight anywhere, but we should not fight everywhere. John Quincy Adams famously said, "We are friends of liberty everywhere, but guardians only of our own." Now, he also authored the Monroe Doctrine, which committed us to the defense of the entire hemisphere. But in today's world, we have to recognize that we fight where our national interests are clearly at stake. But with modern technology, with modern communications, with modern travel means, our national interests can be at stake in the smallest valleys in Afghanistan, where radical Islamic jihadists are plotting just a small cabal, a few dozen, a few $100,000. They can strike us in New York, they can strike us in Washington with just a few aircraft, kill 3,000 Americans, and change so much of the way we lead our daily lives. We have to be prepared to fight against them. Just like we have to be prepared to fight against, say, Iran, which doesn't currently have the means to deliver nuclear weapons to America. But it does have the means to deliver them to our allies and to our outposts around the region. If they were to obtain nuclear weapons, their Sunni Arab neighbors would certainly seek them as well, which means they would go into the hands of Salafist and Wahhabi terrorist organizations, which would deliver them to our shores. And it's important, therefore, that we remember that we are fighting a war. We are not engaged in a law enforcement campaign. I worry that the president thinks we are. Just last week, we learned that we had apprehended in Jordan Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, a vicious propagandizer for al-Qaeda in the days after 9/11, a man who is an avowed and open member of al-Qaeda, who was filling the shoes of his father-in-law after that attack. What happened? Did we send him to Guantanamo Bay for interrogation and ultimately for a military trial? No. We read him his Miranda rights and we sent him to federal district court in New York City. Now it's possible, I suppose, that we had exploited him for all intelligence value in just the few hours or days that we had him. Given that it took years of intelligence interrogations to learn from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other men at Guantanamo Bay that the courier network was still active for Osama bin Laden and led us to his hiding place, I doubt that we actually fully exploited him for intelligence purposes. The president, I worry, is returning us to a law enforcement construct, the kind that prevailed in the 1990s before the 9/11 attacks. And speaking of the 1990s, the final question is, can we afford this war? The answer is yes, we can afford it, and the answer is we must afford it. We certainly have a staggering national debt. Our military is not responsible for that. As a historical average, a percent of both our economy and federal spending, it's still relatively low. It's projected to trend downward, much as it did in the 1970s and the 1990s. And that's why we must afford it. Because think of what happened in the 1970s. The Soviet Union was aggressively on the march around the world in Afghanistan and Africa and Central America. Think of what happened in the 1990s as al-Qaeda and their affiliates repeatedly struck us at the World Trade Center in 1993, Saudi Arabia in 1996, and the East African embassies in 1998, the U.S. Cole in 2000, ultimately on 9/11 in 2001. So we can afford it, and we must afford it. We have the national wealth to do so. We have the manpower to win the war. We have the material to win the war. The question is, do we have the most essential element of combat power? Do we have the will to win the war? Our enemies certainly have that will. They question now whether we do. I know that there's war weariness among the American people, just like there is war weariness among conservatives and in this audience, no doubt. It's little surprising that the American people are war weary when their commander-in-chief is the weariest of them all. But we are the heirs to Ronald Reagan, who believed in peace through strength. Not peace through conciliation, not peace through appeasement, not peace through retreat, but peace through strength. And if America is to fight and to win our wars, and if we are to lead the world, we as conservatives must have the will to win. Thank you.